Це 156.
This is the 156th day of the grinding war of Russia against Ukraine. We are beginning our next briefing, focusing on the global humanitarian crisis and its explication in terms of the human trafficking in the time of war. We've got a lot of guests today, and I will introduce them accordingly. I would like to give the floor to the Kateryna Pavlichenko, the Deputy Minister of the Interior. Welcome, everybody. On the eve of the day of combating the human trafficking, it gives me pleasure to highlight this issue. It has taken on a new urgency in the time of war. The human trafficking issue is deemed to be one of the flourishing businesses of international crime, only the second one to the illegal trade of weapons. The human trafficking has a number of issues. For example, it's part of the general working exploitation of people. Now, of course, we don't have a single picture of the alleged victims as well as that of the perpetrator. Today in Ukraine, we see a lot of internally displaced persons. A lot of Ukrainians have left the country abroad to the European Union countries, and we are thankful to our foreign friends, including the EU countries. At the same time, we are aware that we must do our utmost to make sure that the Ukrainians staying abroad and those who are vulnerable don't get trapped in this human trafficking network. The representative of the National Police and its Department of specific department, he will inform us about figures, but we know that more than 9 million Ukrainians are considered to be displaced. 6 million of them have been registered abroad. More than 300,000 have received the status of temporarily displaced persons. We believe that the lion's share of them is constituted by women and children. Together with the National Police, we are consolidating our efforts to warn the Ukrainian population to prevent such activities and not to get trapped into these criminal activities. We will see now visual on the figures that we have developed together with the National Police and with the project under the auspices of Canada. We have worked out the recommendations for the people who have lost connection with their loved ones that are staying abroad. In the first place, a general recommendation is to keep cool head and turn to the National Police units calling 102 number in case you are staying abroad. This number is 112. You can also request and turn to the local police unit. On the next slide, we talk about the need to provide all possible and available information, meaning the last time you contacted the person where you saw him or her, perhaps you might have some information of a possible stay, and this data must be referred to the National Police. The next recommendation states that it is important to remember that when you search your relatives, you should turn to the law enforcement agencies as opposed to the private bodies. You should be very aware in this situation because there is some fraudulent persons might come your way, so we don't recommend to turn to private services. Once the national police receives such information, they're co-working with the Interpol and other international bodies in different countries to make sure that the search is underway. Once again, I would like to highlight the point that you should be discreet and not to agree to some shady working proposals. You should keep your documents or the copies thereof with you and stay as close in contact with your loved ones as it is possible. I would like to give the floor to Volodymyr Vovk, the head of the task force at the National Police, reviewing the status of people who are deemed to be victims of human trafficking. Welcome, dear colleagues, journalists, and participants of this press briefing. A good news to begin with. Starting next month, the State Department of the United States, in its report on human trafficking, stated that the government of Ukraine is doing enough steps and taking enough steps to combat the human trafficking, and the country is in the second group of such countries. There are 4 groups altogether, and we should know that this is a positive and a very good result. In a nutshell, on the steps that have been taken over the last year, we have conducted 4 webinars with the International Organization for Migration, for the local authorities, bodies, and regional authorities working on the identifying cases of and establishing the reasons and possibility for granting and conferring the status of the victim of human trafficking. Secondly, 4 seminars under the auspices of the OSCE to help the families in the time of war, targeting the specialists of the social care system, called to provide help to those who are potentially likely to be victims of human trafficking or those who have been identified as such victims. Next point, 29 packages of documents have been developed, according to which 25 persons were identified as victims of the human trafficking. Now, the main point for us to get together here, the military aggression, crimes committed by the aggressor state relating to the civilians in Ukraine, detention, and other issues that have sharpened the issue of exploitation through the prism of the Ukrainian criminal code. We have now seen first 3 cases. I would like to turn to the Ukrainians with an appeal that we might initiate a broad public awareness campaign to say that potentially a victim of the human trafficking is likely to be those people who have been deprived of their documents, who have been deprived of the possibility to stay in touch with their relatives, for those who have been sexually abused or physically abused, and they were forced to labor that the person was not willing to perform, those who were pressured in terms of their debts, and those who were deprived of the possibility to quit their job, and those who have been taken advantage of to participate against their will in the armed conflict. These are the reasons for a person to be considered a victim of human trafficking. We must raise the public awareness to provide help to these persons, for them to turn to the local authorities at the level of Rayon and the Oblast, and together with the relative services of the social protection to identify documents relating to and their right of these people to get the status of the victim of human trafficking. What does that lead to? One thing, legal help. Second, a right to be socially protected. Then to receive social protection, to receive your education, or renew one. One of the most prominent, perhaps not defining one, but you will receive 3 minimum wages in terms of help. Today, it's about 7,500 hryvnias. To repeat, to get such a status, you start with the request to the local authorities. You should prompt those next to you. You should advise them to turn to the local authorities at the level of Rayon or region. The documents will be sent over to the service of the state, and the state will help you. To receive additional consultation, there are at least 2 hotlines, a governmental one, 1547, and a public one initiated and implemented within the framework of the International Organization for Migration with the number 527. So national and international lines are available. Thank you. The next to take the floor is Yurii Parkhomenko, the acting head of the Department of Migration at the National Police of Ukraine. Welcome. In the first place, I would like to draw your attention to the international activities of the National Police. We understand that since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, the trafficking in human beings has increased. One, it concerns the internally displaced, externally displaced persons, and people that were forced to go to Russia. As for the internally displaced persons, the picture is quite clear. We've got enough capacity and capabilities to respond to the information we receive. Internationally speaking, it took us some effort to set up coordination. Since the beginning of the invasion, we participated in the 2 pan-European operations combating human trafficking. First step, for the first time in its history, the Ukrainian police were invited to participate in the coordination headquarters during the pan-European operation. The operation was done by the International Agency for Protection of External Borders of the EU countries, and our officer participated in these events. This has provided us with a more coordinated ways to cooperate with the European colleagues to receive information in a speedy and timely manner on the alleged crimes that might have been committed against the Ukrainian citizens. We have also had people on their business trips to Poland to start with, because the lion's share of Ukrainians left for Poland, and the institutional capacity of Ukraine in its way, in many ways, have gone to Poland. So we were made to come to contact with the Polish colleagues, including Monika Sokolowski, through our consular services, and we also attended a number of events. A major of those was the Lodz community, where there are 1,000 Ukrainian children in need of care and a constant attention from the Ukrainian state. So that was the first event we attended. We talked to the children, to the carers, to the authorities of this establishment, and we have defined the imminent threats that might be relevant as of today. The next establishment was people that were displaced to the city of Lodz. The situation there is more or less stable. There are fewer of them. The mayor of the city takes a great interest in caring for the Ukrainian children. He contacts Ukrainian teachers and provides all the possible and needed help for the children and to their teachers. The next event we attended was in Spain, where we set up ways to cooperate with the body that combat human trafficking. We visited our centers for refugees in Alicante. We talked to the Ukrainians. We inspected the environment where they live. What are the challenges and problems? We established the ways to cooperate with the local police. We understand that once Ukrainians have left for other countries, they might receive help either from the Ukrainian embassy or from the local police. So this calls for a deeper communication and interaction. We have visited 2 institutional establishments in Aveda and Pihon.
And we also conducted a certain work there. Some of the preventive measures were taken there. And we did not see any threats and hazards, so the work is conducted on the highest level. The only issues which can be raised there, and it was raised by our ambassador, that is registration of our citizens, because the police is checking just the documents, the IDs of the people who have arrived, giving it to the social service, which in its turn is sending to the dislocation places where they just in fact accommodate them, and then the registration of the citizens is done by the city where they are located at. So there is no overall registration of our citizens. This is an issue, and our ambassador knows about that. The next trip, the business trip, was to Moldova. We have visited, first and foremost, the tent campus, not far from the cross point there, of Palanko-Dobne. We also communicated with our citizens there, listened to them. Everything is okay there. They are provided by everything, the medicines, the food. They have enough of care. From this tent campus, they've been relocated further to Moldova, and they provide them some accommodation. We have seen how they are working there. They really conduct a very thorough work by the ministry. They communicate with each of our citizens, they check each one of them, and they ask each and every one what are the issues, how they can be solved. So this work is really done and conducted. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion with Europol, we have provided and created a platform on the cooperation with the EU member countries, Global Keeper. This platform is visited by all of the applications from Europe, from each country, from each of the applications is reported in this platform. We can see that, we control that, and we can see which applications were in fact solved, which were not confirmed. We would say that there were only 49 of those applications, and only 3 of them were confirmed. As for one of them, we have the criminal proceeding closed. As for 2 more, we are investigating it. This is the use of the citizens at one of the cigarette plants. And one more complaint is into forcing people into beggary. So the European colleagues, the European police is fruitfully working in this sphere. We are cooperating and doing as much as possible to guard our citizens abroad. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. And now we give the floor to Iryna Mydlovets. That's the representative of the International Migration Organization. Hello, dear colleagues. So today, just before the World Day on for the anti-human trafficking, I'm very happy that we are raising this important problematic, especially under the conditions of the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation into the territory of Ukraine. We are the representative office of the International Migration Office, the UN agency. For 24 years, we are supporting the state authorities and the civil population in the fight against this phenomenon to protect Ukrainians from these situations, to provide them with the necessary help and support. So when the full-scale invasion took place, all of us understood how vulnerable have Ukrainians become in the human trafficking situation. We used to speak about that, and we saw that people considered it does not concern them because they have high education, because they have cars, apartment, stable work. They don't plan to go and earn money. They are totally established. But under the current situation, so many Ukrainians were forced to flee from their houses. Lots of them lost their houses and job places. Lots of the Ukrainians had to leave abroad, not because they wanted to go there, but because the conditions, the circumstances were to provide their security. So the people, when we speak about vulnerability, the vulnerability has increased really significantly. And we, together with our partners from the state authorities and civil society, the first thing what we thought that we need to provide the informational security and awareness of people, which could be proposals, which could be triggers, which you shouldn't agree for. We have the continuous work of the National Hotline on the countering human trafficking and consultancy of migrants on the short number 527. And during these 5 months, we got more than 20,000 calls and provided almost 80,000 consultancies. This is the work which the hotline before the full-scale invasion had during the year. So we do understand how many people called and how many people wanted to get the qualified consultation, how they can protect themselves as much as possible. So together with our state partners, with the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Social Policy, the National and Social Service, we have instantly developed the series of informational materials which were targeting the overall population which is living abroad, and also specifically for the women and children, and also the ones who are traveling with children, because we understand that this is the category of people who at the moment were actively leaving Ukraine, for them to be aware that the human traffickers, the exploiters, can sit not only in the chats of the job vacancies as it used to be in the majority of cases. Those could be transporters, those could be the people who are offering you free accommodation. So having such a huge support from all of the European countries to really help Ukrainians who are fleeing from the war, we understand perfectly that it could be a trampoline, a kind of a certain opportunity for the exploiters to use the vulnerability of the Ukrainians and to use that for their own enrichment. In May, we have conducted the high-scale informational campaign, 5 Markers of Security, together with the representative office of the European Union in Ukraine, which has developed, which worked with more than 10 million of Ukrainians, and we told about the main markers which could witness that what you are offered now is the proposal which you should check first, because potentially it can lead to the situation of human trafficking. And also we provided the people with the security rules you need to remember about. We, as an international organization on migration, are providing the direct help and support, the comprehensive and on the reintegration work to help the people who are affected by human trafficking. And we can see just the same situation which we used to have in 2014. The number of the found cases is incredibly decreasing, because in the previous years, annually, we found out more than 1,000 people who were affected by human trafficking. During the first half of the year, it's only 118 persons, out of whom only 35 were the people who were found out just after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and among them there are only some of the cases of the people who were really exploited when the full-scale war was waged. So it witnesses that this issue in 2014 was just the same. The impact of the armed conflict onto the human trafficking situation, we could see it in the end of 2015, when to the high scale we began the discussions of these cases. There can be several explanations for that. First of all, that people at this moment, first of all, are taking care about their own security, and they don't think about what is happening to them now. This is not human trafficking. They just describe it as, I was unlucky, I was really deceived, but they gave me accommodation, so it's okay. So they don't know about those triggers and markers which could witness that this is the situation of human trafficking. Secondly, just elementary, they need time for human trafficking. There is no time to hire a person to provide exploitation, for the person to flee or to be liberated, and for the person to understand that what really took place is human trafficking, and to go to the state authorities, to the NGOs, to the international partners to get help. So this time is approximately from half a year to 1.5 years to assess the real impact of the war situation onto how the tendency has changed in the human trafficking. Knowing that the representative office on migration organization is supporting the unified in Ukraine specialized medical rehabilitation center for the people who were affected on human trafficking, which of course was closed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion because it's located in Kiev. Since the 10th of May, we took a decision to reopen it and to expand the list of its services, not only for the territory, for the peoples affected by human trafficking, but also by GBV, gender-based violence, and exploitation. If we looked on the statistical data among those 118 people who we identified, who we provided help during the first half of the year, 50% of them were exploited within Ukraine. And this is the tendency which we can see since 2020, since the COVID pandemic, which is first of all connected with the closing of the borders, and that lots of people have lost their jobs, so they were searching for those jobs within Ukraine. And what we can see now, and what we would like to warn you about, that there can be an increase of cases of labor exploitation, not just human trafficking in the classic meaning, when the people are, they take the people's IDs, documents, where we see physical and psychological violence against the person with the aim of exploiting. But when the person is just promised some work, and in 2 weeks they say you don't suit it, and they don't pay money. Unfortunately, this is the tendency, and we are already getting such applications and complaints. We can see that, unfortunately, those complaints will be more numerous later. The International Migration Organization is providing the comprehensive support in addition to the help which the state is providing, the social services. This is the medical, psychological, legal help, the help for the family, the help in the tuition and training, in the starting of your own business, the self-employment, to provide the comprehensive work for the person to get out of this situation. And of course, we are supporting the efforts of the state that for people to get to help among the state authorities to identify their status, because it witnesses what was mentioned by the previous speaker, Volodymyr, that the state's efforts against human trafficking. We really do hope that the war will not just get rid of all this incredible piece of work which Ukraine has done during the last 15 years in the creating of the comprehensive response against human trafficking in Ukraine. And now, knowing that there is an incredible amount of volunteer organizations and NGOs which are not specialized service providers, still they have constant access to the vulnerable people who get to them to get help. So we are planning since September, we plan to provide small informational sessions for the non-specialized service providers as for the signs and symptoms in the human story, which can witness that what really happened is the human trafficking situation, and which contacts can be found at the local social services, specialized NGOs, the police, where you can get to get help and to punish the perpetrators. And we are doing all of that together with the All-Ukrainian coalition of NGOs on countering human trafficking. The representative of this coalition is today with us, so I guess that's it from me in this speech, and I'll give the floor to her. Yes, that's it with your work. I give the floor to Oksana Shlyusar, the acting deputy head of the All-Ukrainian coalition on countering human trafficking. Hello, dear participants. Hello, dear journalists. Today, this is the first time when I am the acting deputy head of the coalition, and our coalition of NGOs has been created in 2011. As of today, it covers 31 organizations, and I would like to tell you that each of those organizations each core of the organization never stopped its work. Whenever those people are working, or maybe they were located in any of the regions of Ukraine, they were trying to do what should be done. They were trying to provide help and support. They were trying to disseminate information, how people should search for information. They tried to found and implement lots of projects which foresee support for the internally and forcefully displaced people, or the support of the people who are coming back from the occupied zones. I'm working at the NGO which next year will celebrate its 25th anniversary, and this is also a long period of time for the work in the civil sphere, and it's so important to understand that and to feel that today, at the moment, both the representatives of the NGOs and the representatives of the state authorities and of the executive branch are one and only powerful, unified organism or mechanism which is not only interacting and cooperating, but is also responsibly treating and has a responsible attitude towards its obligations. We understand that every day just responsibility makes our victory closer. Well, you know, getting ready to this speech, I was thinking what I will be speaking about. So I was thinking what we should expect for. And of course, today, as it was already mentioned by my predecessor, Iryna Mydlovets, we don't have that many complaints for the hotline for the people who could be in advance identified as the people who were affected by human trafficking. But I know that those complaints will be much more numerous, and we will have much more applications from the women and girls which were used in the sexual services and who were exploited. We will have much more complaints about the cases of labor exploitation, both within the country and beyond it. And we will have lots of applications and complaints, as we have now, how to get social payments and support, how to find jobs securely. And now we can state the fact that, really, Ukrainians have become incredibly vulnerable, taking risky proposals and because they were just fleeing from the war. And you have heard how many migrants we have within Ukraine, as it was mentioned by Kateryna, and how many of them had to move from Ukraine searching for shelter and getting to the EU countries searching for temporary protection. So when they find themselves out of their zone comfort, losing their accommodation, losing the opportunity to communicate with their relatives, of course those people are becoming vulnerable. It is so important to make them aware about the security markers, the markers of secure behavior. But we need to understand that those new challenges have to be calculated in advance to be ready for them. So again, today I'd like to emphasize what's important now, that both the NGOs which are included into the coalition and which are not included but with whom we are closely cooperating, and the state service, the representatives of the National Social Service and the representatives of the international organizations which are supporting our project are helping to calculate, to understand the issues in advance, beforehand, and to be ready for them. As the representative of the NGO, I may tell you that the work for the prevention is conducted since the first day of the war, and this work covers all of the spheres of preventive work. But as a consultant of the hotline, and I will tell about that later, I will tell you that always when you are conducting a conversation with the person who is calling you, you're asking the person, where did you get to know about our hotline? And according to those figures and indicators, you can in fact assess where the person got the information. So just thanks to interaction and cooperation, our clients, the people who are calling the hotline, the Ukrainians who are trying to get help, 25% out of them get to know about the hotline from other institutions, 30% get to know through the visual ads, and 35% get to know about it thanks to the dissemination of info in the social networks and online, thanks to radio and TV. And this is a huge opportunity which is being used today. And of course, I would like to mention the fact how important it is to post social ads in the places where people just transfer, in the railway transport, for instance, for the person who just went abroad, and this person could say, I got to know that in the train there is the information about the hotline. It's so cool that we're using such opportunities. And in fact, I'd like to add what is expecting us now. I can mention that the complaints are more frequent from the men whose wives and children left Ukraine and are searching for temporary shelter in other countries.
More often than not, these people are experiencing the deterioration in their relations and the communication with their wives, and sometimes women are applying for divorce, and there are men who don't know how to get their children back to Ukraine because these are their own children. So this is one of the issues that we are confronting as a consultant of the hotline. My experience is that I've seen the increase of psychological diseases. And psychological health, as of today, is one of the major issues that we are likely to confront in the near future, expanding the vulnerable population who are forced to illegal activities or poorness or other forms of exploitation. My message is that, as of today, I'm trying to disseminate the information about the hotline, this 5 to 7 hotline, a national hotline to combat the human trafficking and consultation for the immigrants. It has been up and running since the very beginning of the intervention. You will remember that there were times when hotlines were not working in Ukraine at all, except our line. And it seems to be a God's will, because when we set it up, we were basing our work in the glorious city of Ternopil, where I used to live. So we were able to continue work and providing people with the information on the evacuation channels, how to get the social aid, how to receive temporary shelter, how to cross border, how to cross the border by the men, what are the regulations for leaving the country. And of course, in almost all application, we talk people about the markers of safe employment. I remember how my colleagues and I were waiting for the information about the women leaving to enjoy some rest, and we understood that there was a new phase in our work. We were also looking forward to a first request on the information of how women can get back to Ukraine. So there are continuing challenges that we are trying to cope with. So I call on you. Once you have questions and requests, you should be doing this in a self-awareness manner. There is a hotline available. You will receive the information, and it will depend upon you to make further steps. We will now give the floor to the online feed with the Nadia, and we are ready to listen to you. Welcome, dear colleagues, citizens, journalists. Let me present to you the work of our NGO. We are based abroad, and I would like to share with you our presentation, which is a very brief one. Since the beginning of the war, our organization has been working in Poland to help the displaced persons from Ukraine to Poland. We have disseminated more than 39,000 posters and covered hundreds of people so far. We have also initiated dissemination of preventing materials and city lights in European countries, and this has become very urgent. This is the situation, informing people about the markers of abuse and the possible crimes of human trafficking. So far, we have covered more than 2,000 people with the help of these city lights. This is not the end of our story in terms of preventing work. We have developed a flyer in the format of leaflet, and we are disseminating information on the security matters for those fleeing from the war, to prevent the human trafficking, the provision of the emergency services in a number of European countries, and where you can turn for receiving aid, including the railway stations and the centers run by the United Nations organization. So far, we have focused on Poland, but we want to get that work expanded throughout Europe. As for the 30th of July, which is Day of Combating Human Trafficking, we have developed a comic book for the Ukrainian refugees. You will know that depression, stress, the lack of concentration that people suffering from, especially is acute for children, which is also affecting their parents. This comic will help parents to teach their kids how to avoid such states of mind. 1,000 copies will be delivered to the centers for Ukrainian refugees in Poland. Now we are working on the chat box with the function of information. Unfortunately, hotlines don't have Ukrainian language services, so it makes it difficult for Ukrainians to inform the alleged abuses. So currently we are working on this resource. It will help the Ukrainians to self-identify themselves and report on the human trafficking and receive the help from our A21 organization. Last but not least, the preventive video material. The Ukrainian crisis of refugees is very specific, in spite of the fact that we have been able to deliver professional trainings for the personnel of the accommodation centers. We are still waiting for the avenues to prevent such abuses. In terms of the Ukrainian refugees, our team has decided to make a video on the secure employment in the European Union, because there are cases when Ukrainians were employed in terms of employment, they were abused. We are also now the situation when volunteers tell us the situation when people cross the border, the first question people ask is, where do I get my first job? So this is a very vulnerable social strata. We will disseminate this information through our partners to make sure that the message gets across to the Ukrainian citizens with the available QR codes to cover as many people as possible. I would like my colleagues to run the video, the presentation of our seminar, for you to understand how we are working. Welcome, my name is Yurii Parkhomenko. I, as nobody else, know what it means to flee from Ukraine. 131 criminal cases have been initiated, including 12 cases of human trafficking. Many people were presented with a notice of suspicion, and a number of cases have been initiated in the Ukrainian courts. Illicit trade in human beings is a very serious problem. This problem is very important for us to make sure that you get registered. Refugees are, of course, a especially vulnerable group. According to the UN information, there are more than 80 million people who are displaced. This is a serious and challenging illegal activities. Safe employment, many countries of Europe We have watched the video and we are thankful to you. I would like all the panelists to join me here on the podium, because we are now turning to the Q&A session. Perhaps I will begin with the questions while you're getting up to the podium. You have talked a lot about registering of the criminal activities, but it all relates to the European Union countries. We understand this are the countries where there is established rule of law. What do we do with the people who found themselves in Russia, in the occupied territories? Is it possible to get them registered, and how to keep track of these violations? How can we get our people to get help? I will begin, if you will. This is the urgent issue of our agenda. At the coordination headquarters, when we work with the children, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been forcibly deported to Russia and to Belarus. According to the data of the National Information Bureau, we have identified more than 5,600 children, and I'm talking about children only, who have been deported to the aggressor state. We are also aware that the real number is much higher. And today we are developing the mechanisms to return the Ukrainian citizens into Ukraine, including children. I know that in May, the Europol agency has created a Ukraine task force working with the temporarily displaced persons in the European Union, in Europe in general, including the aggressor state of Russia and in Belarus. To the best of my knowledge, this task force will have their sitting today, and the leading country is Austria, including the Slovakia country, Poland, Romania, and other countries. Of course, the law enforcement and Ukrainian police are represented there. One of the issues that they will tackle today is the matter of identifying citizens who have been victims of the forced deportation to Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. When we talk about statistics, it should be highlighted that the National Migration Police are participating in a number of international operations combating human trafficking. As of now, there are 12 criminal cases provided by the Ukrainian Criminal Code, which is human trafficking, including children. Do you have anything to add? In terms of providing more detail, most urgent issue is this. We have set up a number of coordination centers to tackle the issue. At the presidential office, we have also a relative body to protect children. We are aware that the numbers available from the agencies of the United Nations is 1,008,026 persons. The same number has been provided by the State Department of the United States, and the number there are in the range up to 1,006,000 persons. To tackle the issue, we set up a platform at the State Information Bureau. We receive all the information in a written form, in oral form, phone calls that reflect the situation, and we registered them in the unified system. So far, we've got more than 14,000 information pieces. We are cooperating with them, and currently we have confronted a problem where 5,106 persons are missing, and we cannot identify them. We have come in the known about their name or surname, or just the fact that people are missing, so there is no way to elaborate on that. The most urgent issue is to identify as many people as possible. In the same vein, the national police are conducting their own register in terms of criminal investigation. Currently, we have opened 81 criminal investigations. Part of those 59, namely, have been transferred over to the National Security Service, and the National Police have identified within the framework of criminal investigations 79 adults and children that have been registered as missing. We know that this is an unsurmountable piece of work. The numbers are very different. The number that we receive in terms of the displaced persons and the people that have been identified by the National Security Service. I am not in a position to divulge the information because people are not present here. They will tell the number themselves. But at the presidential office, we have got a headquarters that are accumulating the information from the external services, from Ukrainian different law enforcement bodies. And of course, the work is going on. There are special services dealing with the setting up cooperation and identifying the relatives, the conditions of living, and we are trying to substantiate the information because we know that there are some false information that we are likely to receive. I've got a clarification issue here. NGOs of course, are fruitfully working in the European Union countries. But do you keep track and inform people staying in the occupied territories? For example, we've got information that the collaborators are forced to dig trenches, and this falls under the remit of the forced labor. These people may not be aware of this unless they are informed. What is your vision of how to inform people who have been forced to flee to Russia or are staying in the occupied territories? How do you inform them about your work and about the hotline messages? Given the fact that the International Organization for Migration is represented not only in Ukraine but in more than 160 countries, we are working with other countries to make sure that the Ukrainians that were forced to leave Ukraine into the Russian Federation, they go to the European countries or to Ukraine through Estonia or via Latvia, and we are contacting our offices in these countries to make sure that Ukrainians receive such information, that there is a help available, and of course it all conditioned on the will of the persons to receive aid. So we are not delivering aid only because we want to. This must be done voluntarily. People must voluntarily turn to our offices in other countries or to the representation of the organization in Ukraine to receive such an aid. Indeed, preventive work in the occupied territories is exclusively complex because it is dangerous for the NGOs, for the people who are staying there. We must realize that in the occupied territories there is a strong and active tracking down activities of the people supporting Ukraine, which means that the lion's majority of our partner organizations have left occupied territories and are currently working in the Ukrainian-controlled territories, but the preventing work is very complicated, and the reasons are self-evident. This is why we should think together how to make the work more efficient and effective, because we are talking about the possible human trafficking activities. People must be aware that there is a help available at the Ministry of Social Help, at the National Police, and through the international organizations. And of course, we know that the avalanche of the requests will be coming from these territories or from those countries. Two questions from the Ukrinform agency. First question to the police. Iryna Mydlovets mentioned that it's difficult to work out the trends of the human trafficking in Ukraine, but the numbers of people and geographically wise, what can you tell us? What's your take on the situation in general?
So, do you mean what is happening as of today? How many criminal proceedings we have? For instance, you'd like statistical data. The statistics is not changing. We do not see any outburst of this type of criminal perpetrations as of now. According to 77 criminal proceedings, 30 people were announced about the suspicion. This indicator is just the same as we used to have during the previous years. 35 persons are now are considered to be affected and within those criminal proceedings, and as it was already mentioned by the colleagues, 25 persons are now considered victims. So we did not see the increase as for now of this type of criminal perpetrations. What about the geographic distribution? As for the geographic distribution, we don't see any changes as well, but we can see that the threat will be there in the places where we have the biggest number of displaced persons. I mean the externally displaced persons, because we understand that they are deprived of accommodation, of remuneration, so maybe they were deprived of some of their savings and belongings and so on. So, of course, those are the people who will be most vulnerable. As for those types like human trafficking or labor exploitation, we understand that every single person would like to get money and means for existence, to get money to acquire accommodation and so on. So people can just carelessly go to some work and give the information on their IDs. We understand that they can be deprived of those documents, they can be forced to accomplish some works. Maybe they will be even restricted to move. That is why the biggest threat is seen in the regions where we have the biggest number of the displaced citizens of Ukraine. And the second question to all of the participants, could you please tell, as for the situation abroad, the Ukrainians abroad, do you have any facts which would witness maybe the most renowned facts that in Spain and Moldova you have been working, but you don't have the full coverage? So what are the most noticeable facts? Are they from Russia or Belarus? Where are they from? Thank you. As of the countries abroad, as for now, it's hard to assess Russian and Belarusian situation. We understand that we do not have access, and we do hope for the state. For the state which would create a certain mechanism. And maybe post factum, we could register some of the cases of human trafficking later. But as for the European countries, it is under control because, as I've already mentioned, we have worked in Spain, Moldova, France. We also used to be at the preparatory meeting of the All-European operation, which will be conducted in September, about the involvement in labor exploitation, but we are in permanent touch with European colleagues. As I've already emphasized, as for now, we have 49 requests. Only 3 of them were confirmed. Only about 3 requests we've started and launched criminal proceedings, and 1 criminal proceeding is already closed, as the police has already found out the essence of the case. That was about sexual exploitation, but we did not find any proof of that. As for the cyber platform, it is working continuously. Europol, the exchange of information is done 24/7, and international business trips to Europe are only planned. Now we are planning to go to Germany. We are trying to make our work with consulates in order. We have some insignificant cases which we try to respond as quick as possible, and the police from European countries responds quickly as well. One of the cases which I could name, which was not within the criminal proceedings, about our children's 16 to 18 years old leaving the country. We do understand that the legislation allows to move the children since they're 16, but Europe doesn't have such a permit. They can move on their own since they're 18. So, as for Staleva Vola, if I'm not mistaken, as far as I remember, there were 43 children like that. And as of now, in Poland, our consulate service has been involved as well, and now they are given either to the legal custodians or to their parents. Thank you so much. Yes, sure. Well, I'd like to speak about non-typical cases. Those are not situations of human trafficking, but we cannot identify them as cases of human trafficking. Still, those are the options which are, unfortunately, we can see so frequently. For instance, a person is under the program of temporary protection in Poland, for instance, and there is the person who is providing some shelter, some accommodation, saying, I'm providing you accommodation, so please, you can work at my place, in my greenhouses or in my orchard or somewhere else. you're living here, so please, you need to be grateful for that. Or, for instance, they may say, let me help you to do everything quicker. If you give me your IDs, your documents, everything will be very quickly without any issues, and you will have an opportunity to get some financial support or anything else like that. Or they can say, I know what state you're now in, how hard it is for you, so let me give you an opportunity to work. But the salary could be tiny, and it does not correspond to the level of the salaries at the labor market at this country. And the person may not even know about that in this situation, may not think about that. So, I'd like to say that now we have sufficient number of requests and complaints that people are calling being abroad. We are asking them, how do you find us? And they say, I'm just calling 527. Yes, thanks to nice roaming packages, people have an opportunity to get to the hotline directly from abroad. But as this hotline is well promoted and people know this number, even being in the situation under the heavy combat and warfare, being abroad, they can call this line. But to simplify this opportunity to call, we are improving and expanding our work. So now, according to the requirements of the time, we did not only increase the number of consultants, but we also introduced the work of the chatbot, Safe Migration Bot. This is the chatbot 527. Thanks to this chatbot, you can get to know some info about the conditions of arrival to the country and the rules of the secure migration, and what's also important about the contacts where you can find support for those who are staying in Ukraine or for those who left Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any questions left? No questions left? Well, I would like to add, yes, sure. As for the question which you posed about statistical data, it's important to emphasize on some of the issues. First of all, the statistical data which the national police has now are the criminal cases which are opened by the proceedings on the territory of Ukraine. Those are the crimes which were committed against our citizens about the human trafficking on the territory of Ukraine. Altogether, we need to understand that the part of the territory is now under temporary occupation. So now the part of the perpetrations cannot be registered as of now. Besides that, there is one more important issue. If the people are in the situation of human trafficking, we are trying to act in a preventive way. We are warning people not to get into this situation, but if they got into this situation, they should get to the law enforcement and NGOs to get help. So this is most probable that the statistical data will be given a bit later, when we are able to register all of those crimes and perpetrations. And of course, some of the crimes committed on the territory of a different state is done by the law enforcement, is registered by the law enforcement authorities by those countries. Those are the countries where our citizens are represented most of all, because if there is the biggest number of our migrants, then the higher is the risk that they can get into such situation. Our police officers are working with them, but still they do not get into the statistical data of the National Police of Ukraine. The statistical data from abroad, which was mentioned today, is not included. Okay, thank you so much for this important clarification. So now we were speaking about the migration crisis and about some very unpleasant side of this migration as human trafficking. Thank you all of our speakers. Our next briefing will take place at 2 p.m. Kyiv time. We will be speaking with the film director Lisa Tatarina, who will present her movie about Kherson. See you then.